Welcome back. Today we are going to continue our discussion of note-taking strategies. We'll cover a lot today, so let's go. Our learning objectives for today state I will be able to use note-taking strategies in class. And our essential question says, what note-taking strategies work best for me? Let's start with a key point to consider. Your notes need to matter to you. They need to actually have a purpose. Most of the time when you take notes, it's going to be something that you do for yourself. Teacher's not going to look at them, professor's not going to look at them, they're for you. Thus, it's important that we consider ways to make our notes actually work for us. Most importantly out of all of this, if you never go back and actually study your notes, they essentially become useless. You more or less wasted your time. There's a few roadblocks that keep students from actually spending time with their notes. Be real with yourself for a moment. Do you fit into any of these categories? Today, let's start with what not to do. First, while having perfect notes is nice, don't get so fixated on your notes being absolutely perfect that you lose sight of what they're used for. Someone who falls into this category probably is very good at actually taking the notes. They possibly spend too much time taking them. It is possible to spend so much time taking your notes that you don't even have time to go over them. They possibly spend too much time adding external elements. Maybe they're highlighting everything. They're adding too many stickers. Notes just become useless because you've spent all this time making them look crazy. Or they possibly fail to actually use the notes to study. People who fall into category 2 pretty much just end up carrying a big garbage bag around with them. You hopefully don't fall into this category, but I'm sure you at least know somebody who does. Their paperwork, their notes, everything is such a disaster that they're impossible to even access after the notes are taken. For this person, their notes have entered a nightmare dimension that no knowledge can possibly return from. Notes may have been great at first, but they're lost and crumpled and they're gone forever. For this person, it takes so long to find notes that they have no time to study them because they've lost them and thus they're gone. The third category of things not to do is to just basically not take notes. Basically, there's a couple different types of people that fall into this category. They think that they're perfect in some way. They have a perfect memory and they'll never forget what they studied. Maybe they've never had to study for a subject area before, and maybe that's true, but eventually they're going to hit a brick wall at some point in their education and it's going to hit hard. Maybe they are just a sloth and they don't want to move even the tiny amount it takes to take notes. And finally, category 4 is the illegible category. Basically, you can't tell what they wrote. And there's a few reasons for this. They possibly write too fast and just need to slow down. Some people have decent handwriting when they don't speed through it. This person possibly needs some extra help with handwriting or may need to seek another method. Some people legitimately need help and have issues handwriting. For this person, a computer might be a better option. This person also may just be lacking the effort. You do need to put some effort into making your notes look good, or you're not really going to want to go back to them because they're too ugly. The good thing for people falling into all these categories or having all these issues is that they are things that are very easily conquerable. Even the person who is a sloth and doesn't want to do anything can change. Rise from the ashes like the phoenix and become a baby sloth with tons more energy. Now that we've looked at what not to do, let's look at what you should do. There's basically 3 different categories for this. Number 1, you want to use the right materials. Number 2, you want to use the right style. And number 3, you want to review the right way. I'd recommend pausing this slide for just a second and going through these bulleted notes, especially the highlighted parts. While we'll talk about them in just a second, that may help you get ahead a little bit. First step, we want to use the right materials, and for most people that means either a composition notebook or a 3-ring binder with plenty of paper in it. You want to have a place to actually take your notes. For some people, it actually helps to have some nice writing utensils. Get yourself some fancy pens, get some pencils with tiny bears on it. Whatever works for you, be ready. For some people, this first section is incredibly easy. It's almost an afterthought. For other people, this is nightmarishly difficult. For those people who find this incredibly difficult, keeping up with things, having equipment, I would recommend getting doubles. Keep doubles of notebooks in lockers. Keep an extra 3-ring binder ready to go when you need it. Keep tons of pencils, like an absolutely ridiculous amount. This way you will be prepared even if you do lose something. Now, number 2 is going to be the biggest one and the one we'll spend the most time on. It's using the right style. You'll need at least a couple fresh sheets of paper for this part. I'll walk through the 3 styles mentioned before, and I'd like you to at least loosely copy the style out, even if you're familiar with all of them. Label what style it is at the top of the page for reference so you can go back to it later on. Okay, so we're going to run through the 3 different methods of note-taking that I outlined before. I would highly encourage you to follow along and do something similar for each of these methods on a separate sheet of paper. The first method we're going to look at is probably the one that you're most familiar with. This is the outline method. Basically, think bullet points, think spacing things out so that your notes make sense and they work for you in a way where you can go through each topic and kind of write down what you need to. So the first thing you would definitely want to put at the top is the date so that you can stay organized and know what day you took the notes. You could also put something like the lesson number if you know what that is. For each of the main topics that you cover, you're going to want to put what that topic is at the top. So let's say, for example, that I am studying volcanoes today, then I might put volcanoes at the top. That's my main topic. I'm going to have other main topics later on, so maybe I study earthquakes later on in the same lesson. That as well. Then you're going to break it down into subtopics and the supporting details. The topics and subtopics are primarily used for you to find the main things that you studied. The supporting details are really going to be probably the most important part for you to go back to. They're going to be the notes that actually explain what you talked about in class. Now, I'd encourage you as you go along, if you're doing it on a computer, of course, you can, do things like bold them, you can highlight them. If you're doing it on paper, of course, you can do the same thing. You could write things darker. You could use a highlighter on your paper to highlight the important points. It's whatever you need to do. So the outline notes method is probably the simplest. It's probably the quickest to do, but for most people, it's not going to be the most effective. We're going to look at that one next. Cornell notes are probably the most effective method of note-taking you can do. Of course, it's not going to work for everybody, but I'd highly encourage you to take a look at them. If you've used them before and thought they were a waste of time, go back and try it again. The main thing to pay attention to for Cornell notes is that we have lines kind of dividing the paper up into sections. Now, on a piece of notebook paper, this can be a lot simpler. You can take a line right here and put it down kind of on the left side of your page and have a line going right down here on the bottom. Literally drawing one line down the page and one line going across. It's very easy to set up. It takes seconds. Now, you can download different templates using Google Docs like I did right here. This was already created. I downloaded it. I could erase all this content and make my own notes if I was doing this on a computer. But for our purposes, I'm going to leave it because it has some good information. You're going to split these top 2 sections up into cues and the note-taking column. For the cues, think of like the main topics, the main ideas for your paper. This would be like you putting the main points using the outline method to the left. The note-taking column is, of course, where you're going to keep the bulk of your notes. You could also put some other relevant information at the top, like what subject you're studying. You could put the lesson, your name, of course, things like that. For the cues column, it says to jot down 1 or 2 words that are the main idea of a passage. Leave space between each one. And then it says questions. As soon after the reading as possible, formulate questions based on the notes in the right-hand column. Write one under each cue word. So for example, if I put volcanoes, under volcanoes, I could put something simple like, how do volcanoes work? And hopefully I answer that in the note-taking column. In the note-taking column, you want to record. While reading, use the note-taking column to record supporting facts, ideas, etc. This works whether you're reading a book, watching a video, whether you're listening to a teacher lecture, any of those work. And then you want to recite. When you're done with the notes, you can go back over them. You can cover up the paper, this part of it, look at the main idea and see if you remember the notes. You can go back and reflect using them. And then, of course, review them. This encourages you to do it every week so that you retain that info. For example, if it's a unit lasting 3 weeks, then you cover it maybe once or twice every week so you remember what you studied. Finally, the summary section is what we use the very bottom of the paper for. And this is so that you can go back later on and write a summary of what you learned. You can go back and read your notes if you want to, but the summary section is going to be really useful if you want to go back later and actually review the notes in a short amount of time. For example, right before you take the test. Cornell notes look complicated, but on paper, they're pretty easy. Finally, we have the mapping method, and this one is kind of the most free roaming, do whatever you feel like you need to type of note-taking method. It works really well for some topics and not so well for others. And that's kind of just the thing that you'll have to experiment with and try and see if it works. For ease of recording, I have a Google Slides presentation up, which you could of course use if you were taking notes using a computer. However, it's probably going to be easier and better for you if you just have a piece of notebook paper out. So one way that I could do this, when we're doing mapping, think of shapes to help us divide topics. So I'm going to insert shapes. And again, I'm going to put my main idea at the top and kind of go down from there. So let's say that my main idea is, of course, volcanoes, because for some reason that's what we've chosen to cover today. That's going to be our main idea. Then I might use other things to help me break it down into smaller sections. Let's say that I pick an arrow and I put one here and I copy it and I paste it, and now I've got it branching down into a couple different areas. I can add some more shapes in here. Let's do a circle. And let's do the same thing. Copy, paste. Got a couple circles. Maybe these are my subtopics. I don't know what those subtopics would be. Now I've got two places to branch my subtopics down. And finally, I could put some actual space for my notes. For ease, I'm just going to put a text box down here. Put my notes, insert another text box, and I've got room to go. Now, some people find having visual cues like this help them a little bit more. My example is really ugly, but if you're more of an artist or you want to take more time, then this can be a really good method. You could also take either your outline notes or your Cornell notes and use this as a way to review. You could go back to it later and make a map of your topics. And having that visual representation may help you more than just a whole bunch of words on a page. If you want to get really creative, you could even do drawings. You could make a little volcano, or you could look up a picture of a volcano and add it to your slide. That's just lava. We want a volcano. You can add it in, and suddenly you have a main idea that's a visual representation. You can do some pretty cool stuff with this. It's kind of a fun way to study if you want to. You can make it look cool, but that's mapping more or less. All right, now that we're done going through the three styles, I want you to try to experiment with the different styles. Unless a teacher tells you to use one style specifically, find what style works for you. Don't just take the easy road. Some will work better than others, and some will work better for different people. The final step, step 3, is reviewing the right way. And the first place to start with that is the concept of repetition. For most people, they have to see something many, many, many different times for it to actually stick and become more permanent or more long-term knowledge. So start by repeating what you've learned and going over your notes. Finally, there's tons of other options for going over your notes. Take the notes that you've written and put them into a website like Quizlet or Quizzes, which are both great websites for going back and studying your notes, creating tests that you can do, or making flashcards digitally that you can access on places like your phone. Or if you want to be old-fashioned, get out a piece of paper and make your own test. Try to predict what the teacher's going to ask you from your notes, and oftentimes that works as great studying. For a wrap-up today, consider this. There's usually not a one-size-fits-all approach to note-taking. That being said, many agree that Cornell notes are very effective for most people in most subjects. I ask you to test out the different approaches, but remember that using your notes to study is the most important function of your notes. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.